All right, I'm going to go through some of this slope-intercept form information from lesson 9.5. I gave you an IXL topic to do that I think some of you have done, and I just posted the 9.5 worksheet skills practice, and I just wanted to do a few examples of this just to help you guys out with the worksheet. First of all, well, maybe a couple things we've talked about before. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. These parts here, this y and this x, are the variables that will be in almost all of your equations, so you won't really be putting in numbers for those when we use this slope-intercept form. You will be filling in for m, and as we said before, that is where slope goes, and the b stands for the y-intercept. Y-intercept means where does that line cross the y-axis if we're looking at a graph. So let me just put a basic problem down here for you. Let's say y equals 2x plus 1. And they're going to ask you for two pieces of information. They're going to ask you to find the slope, and they're going to ask you for the y-intercept. Well, we just look for the two numbers in those places where they should come from. Slope, just like we talked about up here, slope is the number that's in front of the x. Well, if I look at this equation I wrote, the number in front of the x is 2. That means my slope is 2. Or we could also write it this way. It means the same thing, 2 over 1. And you'll see why I'm writing both of those there. You'll see why in just a second. So the slope is 2, or you could say 2 over 1. Those mean the same thing. The second part, find the y-intercept. Well, just like up here, the y-intercept is that last number that's by itself with no variable plus 1. So I know my y-intercept is a positive 1 because it says plus 1. It doesn't have a negative sign there, so it's a positive number. Now you're going to get to a point where they ask you to find the slope, which you did, find the y-intercept, which we did, and then graph the equation. So then I'm just going to sketch a graph. This doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exact. We just want to get a decent idea of what this line looks like. When you graph it, you start with the y-intercept first. I need to put that point on my graph. And the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. And this vertical line is our y-axis. So I'm going to go up to a positive 1, and that's where my point is going to go. That's where my line is going to start. Then, second, I use the slope, and my slope is 2. But now you're going to see why I said it could be 2, or we might say that it's 2 over 1. We say that it's 2 over 1 because slope tells us about, they say it's called rise over run. How far it goes up, how far it goes over. So anytime you have a whole number slope, like we do here with 2, a lot of times we say 2 over 1 because that tells us we're first supposed to rise 2 and run 1. Rise talks about up and down. Run talks about left and right. So to get to my second point, I have graphed the first point right here. To get to my second point, I use my slope, and I start from that point at the 1, and I go up 2 over 1. And that is another point, and I can do it a couple more times. Up 2 over 1. And for some of these lines, you're going to get to a place where maybe you run out of room on the top of your graph. Well, instead of trying to keep going up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, and I run out of room, I could go back to where I started and say, oh, well, I'm going to go down to the other way 1. Down to the other way 1. And when I look at those lines that I have plotted right there, those dots form a straight line. So they should. I kind of missed the dots a little bit, but that's how you graph the line of these equations when you have them in slope-intercept form. So let's look at a few different problems, something you might run into on your worksheet. For example, let's just say I have a problem that says y equals 2/3 x, and it wants to know the slope. It wants to know the y-intercept, and it wants you to graph the equation. When you guys do these on your worksheet, it's perfectly okay for you to do it on a blank piece of paper, just like I'm doing it on here. Find those, sketch your graph just like I am. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Just make sure I can see what the slope is, what the intercept is. Those are the important things. So when I look at this equation, the slope, like we talked about before, slope is that number that's in front of the x. So if I get back to this problem, the number in front of the x is 2/3. So my slope is 2/3. That's perfectly fine, and it's actually good that it's a fraction. That tells me I go up 2 and right 3. The y-intercept now. The y-intercept is supposed to be some number that comes after the x, and I don't see anything there. And that's okay. If there's nothing there, it's really like there's an imaginary plus 0 there. So my y-intercept is just at 0. Now, just like I talked about in the previous problem, first I start with the y-intercept. Well, it's at 0. Here's the y-axis. I'm going to go to 0. That's right in the middle. And that's where I'm going to put my first point. And second, I'm going to use the slope. And the slope is 2/3. I have it right here. That means I go up 2, 1, 2, from the dot that I put there first. I go up 2, 1, 2, and then I go right 3 this time. 1, 2, 3. And there's my point. Do it again. Up 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay? And as I said before, if we want to go back to the beginning, I can go in the opposite direction and get the same thing. Instead of going up 2, I can go down 2, and the other way 3. And that still puts those dots all on the same line. Wow, I'm bad at that. I gotta fix that somehow. There, that one's a little bit better. So there's my line. Let's talk about slope for a second, because both of these problems that I've done have had a positive slope. That one up there that we did had a slope of 2. This one had a slope of 2/3, both positive numbers. if my slope is positive, that means I'm going to go up and right. Okay, if the slope is positive, I'm going to count up and right. Up and right. If my slope is negative, I'm going to count down and still right. One of the mistakes that people make when they start and they're just beginning with slope is they think, oh, if positive is up and right, negative must be down and left. But down and left actually gets you back to a positive slope, because down is negative and left is negative. So that's like negative over negative makes positive. Okay, so make sure you remember when it says a positive slope, it means I'm counting up and right. When it's a negative slope, I count down and right. So let's do an example with a negative slope. Here's my equation. Y equals negative 3x minus 5. Now we've changed a couple of things here. Let's go ahead and find the slope. Again, that's the number that's in front of x. The slope is negative 3. But just like that other one we did, we can also say the slope is negative 3, or it can be written as negative 3 over 1. And remember, writing it this way, this second way, helps us count the slope as we put it on the graph. The y-intercept now, be careful when we write this one down. It says minus 5, so we got to make sure I know that my y-intercept is at negative 5. Negative 5. So if I look at the graph of this, again, the y-axis is this one that goes up and down. My y-intercept is at negative 5, so that means I start in the middle and I go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm at negative 5 on the y-axis, and that's the first point I put on the graph. Then I use my slope next, and it says negative 1 over 3. And if you remember what we just said here, if the slope is negative, I count down and right. So I'm starting at my point of negative 5, starting here, and counting down 3. 1, 2, 3, right 1. Now you can see here kind of what I was talking about before. If I go down, whoops. If I go down, no, it's not letting me do that. If I go down 3 more, 1, 2, 3, over 1, you can see I'm kind of starting to run off the graph here, which is okay. What I had told you before was when that happens, I can go back up to the point where I started at that negative 5. I'm talking about this point here. And instead of counting down 3 and right 1, I can go up. Down 3 and instead of going down 3 and right 1, I can go up 3. 1, 2, 3, and the other way 1, and left 1 instead of right. And you can see 1, 2, 3 over 1. All those points still put me on the same line. All right. One other thing that they might do to you is change the way that they give you the problem. They might say something like negative 9x plus y equals negative 5. Now this does not look like slope-intercept form, like everything else that we've looked at. It's just out of order. And before I can find the slope for this and the y-intercept, I have to rearrange it and put it in the right order. And I want to get this y by itself here. I want to take this negative 9x, and I want to move it to the other side. Well, if you remember from before, how would we move a negative 9x to the other side? We have to do the opposite, which means I have to add 9x. Those cancel. I have to add 9x to this side. And now, all that I have remaining on the left side is the y. Take a look at the right side. I cannot take this negative 5 and combine it with the 9x because they are not like terms. The 5 doesn't have an x with it. When I write this next step here, I want to try and have it in the same order that they tell me I should. I want the x part to come first and then the other number to come last. So that means I'm going to take this positive 9x, and that number is going to go first. And then, what do I have remaining? I still have this negative 5. And make sure you say that it's negative 5, or that you say minus 5. Don't forget about that negative sign. So when I look at this, I know the slope is 9, or what could I say? 9 over 1. So when I graph it, I understand it a little easier. And my y-intercept is negative 5. So if I sketch this just kind of quickly over here, y-intercept is what I start with first. This is the y-axis, my up and down, my vertical. Go down to 5 because the y-intercept is at negative 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now this is going to be a very steep line. My slope is 9, or 9 over 1. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and over 1. And there's my point. I could do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 over 1. And get another point. Now I'm way off my graph. All right, but it's going to be a very steep, whoa, I missed the points there. But you get what I'm doing. A very steep line. So again, like I said for this, make sure if your equation starts out not in the right order, like this one had negative 9x plus y equals negative 5, we had to add that 9x to the other side. And when I write this down again, to emphasize, the x part comes first. That's why I wrote the 9x, and it's positive, so there was no negative sign in front of it. The 9x goes first, and then the minus 5 next. So sometimes you're going to have to rearrange things and get them in the right order. If you saw something, maybe it says 3x plus 2 equals y. That's perfectly fine. We can flip this whole equation. We don't have to change anything. this is the same as saying y equals 3x plus 2. So I don't have to change anything there. So I hope that helps you get through the worksheet. If you just get really stuck on something and don't understand, leave me a comment on Google Classroom, or go ahead and shoot me an email, and I'll try and help out however I can. All right, hope that helps.